Why Einstein's relativistic mechanics is against the laws of nature. By Francis T.S. Narrated by Mary Urbach. It is because his revolutionary theory was developed from a non-physical, realizable, empty space platform. So, what is his platform? It is his four-dimensional space-time paradigm, which is a zero-summed space-time model that violates all the laws of nature. What are the laws of nature? To name a few: law of thermodynamics, law of time, law of entropy, and law of energy conservation. Since everything within our universe has a price tag, a section of time, delta t, and an amount of associated energy, delta E, is not free. Einstein was one of the greatest fundamental physicists of all time, but his relativity theory is one of the most misleading science theories of the 20th century. Nevertheless, the fault is due to us, since we knew his relativistic mechanics is so irrational, yet we opted to follow. Fundamental principle is to discover, but not create. Since the fundamental principle of science is supposed to discover from Mother Nature, it must obey the laws of nature. What are the laws of nature? Which are the laws that we had discovered that supported the physical reality of our living time-space? For examples, law of time, which is a forward-dependent variable that coexists with our universe. Second law of thermodynamics, law of entropy, and law of energy conservation. These are the laws of nature that simply cannot be violated. In this presentation, I shall show that Einstein's relativistic mechanics have violated all the laws of nature, for which it is fair to say that his revolutionary science is as fictitious as mathematics. It is even fake. Isolated to temporal, that is, t is greater than 0, subspace. Since the physical reality of a scientific hypothesis relies on a physical, realizable paradigm, let me begin with a thermally equilibrium isolated subspace, as depicted in this slide. Since it is a thermal equilibrium isolated subspace, its entropy is at the highest state, but cannot do work. For this subspace to do work, if the size can be enlarged, it takes a section of time, delta t, to make it happen. This is precisely why isolated subspace must be situated within a temporal t is greater than 0 space. In other words, without the existence of time, it has no way to enlarge the subspace. Secondly, subspace and emptiness are mutually exclusive. Therefore, it is wrong to assume that our universe was created within an empty space, as commonly assumed. Creation of a thermodynamic universe. As we accepted the Big Bang hypothesis, the explosion must be initiated within a temporal, that is, time is greater than 0, space, as depicted in this slide. Therefore, it follows that our universe is an energy conservation bounded dynamic subspace, which was created within a larger time space, that is, temporal time is greater than zero space. Secondly, as the boundary of our universe expands, its entropy increases rapidly from a very low entropy state, that is, the highest degree of certainty, as the boundary enlarges at the speed of light. It is important to note that this universe creation is probably one of the closest to the true paradigm, as it obeys all laws of nature. An energy-conserved dynamic universe. This slide shows how our universe was created by a dynamic expansion. It was started from a low entropy state, Big Bang explosion, about 14 billion light years, that's BLY, ago, within a pre-existed temporal, that is, time is greater than zero, space. Since things change with time, physical reality of time-space occurs only once with absolute certainty when t equals zero. Once it is gone by, we cannot get it back. This is precisely the universe we are living in. It follows that our universe is an energy conservation dynamic universe where entropy increases naturally with time. Since our universe is an energy conservation subspace, its total energy is equal to the amount of degraded or decayed energy plus the amount of remaining usable energy, as given by the following formula, where E prime of Tn equal delta Tn. Delta E prime of Tn is the amount of degraded energy at T equal Tn. E prime of Tn is the remaining usable energy respectively at T equal Tn, which is the time at the nth dynamic physical reality. Delta E prime of Tn is the magnitude or amplitude of the degraded energy within a section delta Tn at T equal Tn. M is the mass of the Big Bang. Therefore, every subspace or substance, regardless of the size, degrades, that is, decays with time. One time only physical reality. This slide shows that physical reality can only exist once at a present moment, that is, t equals zero. It cannot be repeated since our universe is an energy conservation dynamic subspace that changes with time. It follows that it is physically impossible for mathematical scientists to hypothesize that multi-universes exist within our time-space. Because things change with time, physical reality occurs of absolute certainty only at the present moment when t equals zero, that is, delta t equal 14 BLY. Once a reality is gone by with time, we cannot get it back. This is precisely the universe we are living in, that is not against the laws of nature. Einstein's space-time violated laws of nature. As depicted on the left of this slide, it shows Einstein's zero-summed time-independent space-time continuum. This space-time paradigm violated all the laws of nature. This is precisely the reason why our modern science is so irrational and so wrong, since the foundation of modern physics was established from this space-time model. But the physical reality principle depends on a physical realizable paradigm for which we see that Einstein's relativistic mechanics, as well as Schrödinger's quantum mechanics, are doomed to be false, since they were developed from this empty space platform. Fundamental principles are discovered. One of the greatest discoveries in science must be the gravitational law of Newtonian mechanics, which can be developed from an apple falling from an apple tree, as depicted within an empty space model. Similarly, Einstein could have discovered his special theory if he had assumed the apple is falling at the speed of light. These two scenarios were situated within an empty space model, but why has the gravitational field been regarded as a discovery and Einstein's relativity theory is not? It is because Newton had assumed the Earth is stationary, but Einstein had assumed the apple and planet Earth were moving relatively toward each other. However, empty space is a virtual space. It has no time and no space. But we have used this subspace for centuries, not knowing it is not a physically realizable subspace. Relativistic mechanics fails to exist. Nevertheless, if the same hypothetical scenario is embedded within a temporal, that is, t is greater than 0 space, we see that it is impossible for Einstein to develop his relativistic theories, since pace of time moves at the same pace everywhere within our universe. Since Einstein's relativistic mechanics was developed from his created 4D spacetime continuum, any principle, theory, or idea developed from his space-time continuum is doomed to be fictitious and even fake. This includes his special and general relativity theories as well. Furthermore, if one embeds any of Einstein's hypotheses within our time-space, it is quite easy to figure out that his relativistic hypotheses are not true. Einstein's space-time was created. Since the reality of a fundamental principle is determined by a physically realizable paradigm, it is very difficult for us to continue to support the theory that the foundations of our modern science are physically real. Thus, it is fair to say that any fundamental principle or theory that was developed from Einstein's space-time paradigm is doomed to be false and even fake. A reasonable scientist should let our mathematically inclined scientists know that we have been trapped within Einstein's space-time paradigm for over a century. It is unfair and even harmful to our students, our children, our grandchildren, to keep learning those fantasy sciences that do not exist within our time-space. Physical realizable principle. Unlike mathematics, science must be physically real. Let me show a simple case of a physical realizable principle. For instance, cosine omega t represents a wave principle. The first question to ask, is this wave principle a time-independent equation? The answer is yes, if the principle does indicate it can exist with a negative time domain. However, if your answer is no, then it must be subject to the physical reality of time, which is a forwarded variable that cannot even stop or even change its pace. Similarly, Schrödinger's time-independent wave equation follows the same principle. Since it is time independent, it is not a physically realizable wave equation. In physical reality, it cannot be used in the negative time domain or even instantaneously within our time-space. But why do we keep using it? And this is precisely the reason why quantum mechanics is so wrong. Are we responsible scientists? The answer is probably not. Since we were indoctrinated with those fantasy principles, even we knew they were weird, yet we opted to accept the approval of the others. For example, the legendary Richard Feynman once said, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics." This means that if he does not understand, we do not deserve to understand. However, if he would have found out why we do not understand quantum mechanics, then it would have a different story. Nonetheless, interpretation of a paradox in science means that the paradox does exist. Our time-space exists only once in its physical reality. This must be the reason why we were and still are a group of faithful followers which have opted to accept the approval of others. Our modern physics has been polluted by a score of fantasy sciences. In view of current modern science, there is a score of fantasy ideas, add a bunch of talk show scientists, that has polluted our scientific community. It is fair to say that those fantasy sciences are more harmful than beneficial. In other words, would you want your students, children, and grandchildren to continue learning those non-existent principles? We have wasted billions, if not trillions, of taxpayers' money, which could have been used for other realistic and more constructive sciences. Furthermore, where did those observable dark matters and energy come from? Our universe is an energy-conserved dynamic subspace that changes with time. There is a good reason to relate the observable dark matters and energy with the degraded, that is, decayed energy within our bounded universe, since decayed substances remain within our dynamic bounded universe. Paradox and science are mutually exclusive. Empty, that is, timeless space, and non-emptiness, that is, temporal space, are mutually exclusive. Then, without the existence of non-existent empty space, how can we have the existence of our time-space? We cannot have both our time-space, that is, time is greater than zero, and timeless, time equals zero, space. Since timeless space is not supposed to exist within our time-space, so where does timeless space exist? From our time-space standpoint, timeless or empty space is a virtual mathematical space. This is precisely why mathematics is not physics. But without mathematics, that is timeless, there will be no theoretical physics. From this, we see that mathematics is not science, but we have let mathematical-oriented physicists hijack our science for centuries. Since they had treated mathematics as science, this is precisely the reason why we have so many paradoxes in science. Thank you.